The air around Lake Crescent was always unnervingly still, even on days when the Olympic Peninsula thrashed with storms. It was a stillness that didn't promise peace, but rather a profound, ancient watchfulness. Dr. Aris Thorne, a marine historian whose career was built on unraveling historical anomalies hidden beneath the waves, felt it the moment his boots touched the gravelly shore. The towering, old-growth conifers seemed to lean in, their branches weaving a dense canopy that perpetually shaded the lake, giving its surface a dark, reflective quality. He'd arrived with a boatload of cutting-edge sonar equipment, a deep-sea ROV, and an obsession born from a single forgotten paragraph in an old logging company ledger. Locomotive 73, lost, Lake Crescent, 1910. Cease search. Damage too great. Loss accepted. Locomotive 73. A logging engine, according to the cryptic note. No official records of a train ever reaching the deep, clear waters of Lake Crescent. The local historical archives were silent, almost deliberately so, on any such incident. Most locals, if they even knew the fated legend, dismissed it as a tall tale, an old wives' fable spun around campfires, a morbid fantasy born of the region's wild, untamed nature. But Aris, with his historian's nose for anomalies and a diver's ingrained respect for the unseen depths, knew better. The water here was unique. Fed by glacial melt, it was so pure, so cold, so deep that it preserved things unnaturally well. He knew the chilling folklore of the Lady of the Lake, a murder victim whose body resurfaced years later, perfectly preserved by the lake's icy embrace, her features eerily lifelike after decades. This wasn't just a lake, it was a mausoleum, a perfectly clear, utterly silent vault. His initial dives were methodical, painstaking grids across sections of the lake bed. He piloted the ROV, a sophisticated machine with powerful lights and high-definition cameras, across the mapped floor. The clarity was breathtaking, almost disorienting in its perfection. Sunlight, even at significant depths, penetrated further here than anywhere he'd ever dived, creating ghostly shafts of light that pierced the gloom. It felt less like being underwater and more like floating through an immense, silent blue-black void where sound was muffled and distance became an abstract concept. The sonar picked up peculiar distortions, faint echoes that didn't conform to geological formations. They were too regular, too metallic, yet always shifting, as if teasing him, moving just beyond the reach of his direct observation. He'd hear strange, low-frequency hums through his comms, like distant machinery groaning, or perhaps something far older, a primeval vibration emanating from the very bedrock of the lake. Days bled into nights without distinction, the lines between work and rest blurring into an obsessive haze. Eris ate little, slept less, fueled by lukewarm coffee and the nagging call of the unknown beneath the surface. The lake began to fill his waking thoughts, then seep into his dreams, a cold, vast emptiness where he saw faint, dark shapes moving at the periphery of his vision, always just out of focus. The hums from his comms seemed to follow him ashore, vibrating in the oppressive stillness of his small, rented cabin, just audible over the crackle of the fireplace, a constant low thrum against the background of his own pounding heart. He found himself staring at the obsidian surface of the lake for hours, feeling a pull, a strange magnetic force drawing him closer. Then, on the ninth day, as a thin silver mist began to creep across the water, he found it. Or rather, it let itself be found. The peculiar echoes from the sonar suddenly resolved, coalescing into an undeniable massive form. His sonar screeched, a sustained angry shriek that tore through the cabin's quiet, making him jump. His ROV's camera, usually so steady, began to judder violently, as if a powerful current had gripped it or something unseen was deliberately shaking it. He compensated, fought the controls with a desperate grip, pushing the miniature submersible deeper, past the 400-foot mark, then 500, into the realm of crushing pressure and eternal twilight where no natural light could penetrate. And there, looming out of the impossible blackness, stark against the impossibly clear, ancient rock face of the lake bed, was the locomotive. But it wasn't merely a sunken train. It was a monstrosity, a grotesque fusion of engineering and something utterly alien. Locomotive 73 was fused with the very rock, its metallic chassis melting into the ancient stone as if absorbed by it. Its boiler, instead of a cylinder of steel, was a grotesque, elongated sack of rusted metal, and something that looked disturbingly like ossified bone, pulsating faintly as if still drawing breath. Vines of bioluminescent moss, glowing with a sickly, pulsating green, snaked around its massive wheels which were rooted deep into the sediment as if they had organically grown there, like gnarled metallic roots. The cab was violently warped, its heavy metal skin peeled back like rotting flesh, revealing not gears and controls, not the familiar mechanisms of human ingenuity, but a dark, gaping maw, a void within a void. It was part machine, part organism, part tomb, and wholly terrifying. A primal fear, cold and sharp as the glacial water itself, pierced Aris's very soul. The ROV's lights, usually so powerful they could illuminate an entire section of the lake bed, seemed to dim, swallowed by the sheer, malevolent presence emanating from the depths of the derelict engine. He zoomed the camera in on the cab, his fingers trembling on the joystick. Inside, pressed against the warped glass that was now more like hardened amber, were forms. Not skeletal remains, not mere shadows, but faces. Human faces. Their expressions were frozen in grotesque agony, eyes wide and sightless. Yet somehow he felt them looking back, a collective, silent stare that chilled him to the bone. There was no mistaking the faint, pale glow within their empty sockets. It was the same unsettling green as the moss that coated the train, pulsing faintly in sync with the train's own grotesque heartbeat. He pulled the ROV back with a violent jerk, his hands shaking so hard he almost dropped the control unit. The pressure, he told himself, trying to rationalize the irrational, the isolation, sleep deprivation. But the dread he felt was not of crushing water. It was of something ancient, something that waited in the deep, actively, patiently. Back on the surface, Aris tried desperately to rationalize his findings. Gas from decaying bodies creating optical illusions, he thought. A unique bioluminescent bacteria thriving on the metal. But the faces, they were too clear, too numerous, each one distinct in its terror. And the train itself, it hadn't sunk, no. It had descended with purpose, like an animal retreating to its lair. It had become part of the lake, yes, but more accurately, the lake had claimed it, consumed it, and warped it into something new and terrible. His sleep became a torment. He dreamt of the deep, of the vast, cold emptiness stretching into infinity. He heard whispers in his dreams, faint at first, then growing louder, sloshing through watery static, always beckoning. They weren't words in any language he knew, not really, but pure, distilled anguish, punctuated by the rhythmic, metallic thump, thump, thump of an engine, still running, still alive, somewhere far below, echoing in the cavern of his skull. He started seeing flashes of the faces, the grotesque, amber-imprisoned visages in his peripheral vision, reflected in his cabin window, momentarily superimposed on the surface of his coffee, even in the condensation on his breath in the cold morning air. Always the glowing green eyes, always staring, always inviting. He unearthed old records from the local historical society, forgotten newspaper clippings about isolated disappearances around the lake in the early 20th century. Hikers who vanished without a trace, loggers who never returned from their shifts, even a family on a picnic whose abandoned car was the only clue. Cases that went cold, bodies never found. The lake, they said, always returned its dead, unless it chose not to, unless it decided to keep them. The whispers from his comms, even when disconnected from the ROV and powered down, grew stronger, more insistent. They called to him, a siren song from the abyss, not his name, but a promise of understanding, of absolute blissful joining with the stillness, with the depths. He knew with a terrifying, absolute certainty that Locomotive 73 wasn't merely a wreck. It was a lure, a trap. The lake wasn't preserving things. It was collecting them, assimilating them. And the faces, those glowing green eyes, they weren't victims. They were its guardians, its extension, its chorus. He had to go back. Not with the ROV, not with remote controls. He had to descend himself. He had to know the full, terrible truth. He had to join them. His final dive was desperate, manic, fueled by a terrifying blend of fear and irresistible compulsion. The lake surface was like obsidian, perfectly still, reflecting the bruised twilight sky and his own distorted reflection. He geared up, his hands moving automatically, his heart pounding a frantic, irregular rhythm against his ribs. The pressure of the water was a physical weight, pressing in on him, but the unseen pull from below was stronger, far more irresistible, a spiritual gravity. He dropped, the descent slow and deliberate, the powerful lights on his helmet cutting through the liquid darkness, illuminating dancing motes of ancient dust. The water grew colder, colder than anything he had ever felt, a chill that seeped into his bones and marrow. The hum in his ears intensified, a resonant thrum that vibrated through his very bones, threatening to rattle his teeth. And then, there it was, looming out of the black, larger, more grotesque, more alive than he remembered. The living train. As he neared, the bioluminescent moss pulsed brighter, a sickly emerald beacon against the black canvas of the deep. The warped metal of the cab seemed to shift, to expand, like a lung-drawing breath. He pressed his faceplate closer, a suicidal urge to truly see. The faces within the amber-like glass were clearer now, gaunt, impossibly preserved, contorted in timeless agony, yet their eyes burned with that unwavering, malevolent green light. They were not just staring, they were welcoming him. They were smiling, or perhaps grimacing in ecstatic agony, finally released from their individual suffering into a collective consciousness. They opened their mouths, not to scream, not to warn, but to inhale, drawing him in, drawing everything in. The whispers were no longer whispers. They were a chorus, a symphony of lost souls, screaming and inviting and commanding all at once, resonating directly in his mind. Join us. Join the stillness. Become one with the depths. Become infinite. His dive computer shrieked a deafening alarm. His air supply was draining, impossibly fast, as if something unseen was sucking the very oxygen from his tank. His body began to feel heavy, impossibly heavy, as if the water itself was reaching out with invisible tendrils, pulling him in, trying to make him part of its silent, obsidian embrace. He struggled, thrashed, but the current was too strong, the compulsion too overwhelming, his limbs suddenly unresponsive. He felt himself being drawn, inexorably, towards the gaping maw of the locomotive, the glowing eyes of its inhabitants fixed on him, welcoming him into their timeless, green-lit torment. Aris's research boat was found days later, adrift near the shore, tossed by gentle waves as if abandoned in haste. His carefully organized notes were scattered across the cabin floor, damp and curling, hinting at madness, obsession, and an impossible discovery. The last entry in his journal, scrawled with a desperate, shaky hand, was a single, chilling word, barely legible: home. Lake Crescent remained, clear, deep, cold, its surface serene, perfectly reflecting the sky, betraying no hint of the horrors it held. But sometimes, when the light hit the water just right, creating shimmering patterns on its dark surface, or when the wind died to an absolute unnatural hush, one might swear they could see a faint emerald glow from its unfathomable depths. And if you listened closely, very closely, in that profound unearthly silence, you might just hear the distant, rhythmic thump, thump, thump of an engine, still running, deep within the obsidian silence, a constant, tireless heartbeat. Perhaps a new set of eyes now gleamed in the preserved cab of Locomotive 73, adding to the silent chorus of the deep.